Sorry, I call the member for Indi. Thank you.
Deputy Speaker, it gives me enormous pleasure to speak to the report Smart Farming, Inquiry into Agricultural Innovation, presented by the House of Representatives Standing Committee of Agriculture and Industry. Our terms of reference for this report were to conduct an inquiry, in particular to have regard to improvements in the efficiency of agricultural practices due to new technology, emerging technology relevant to the agricultural sector in areas including but not limited to telecommunications, and to report on barriers to adoption of emerging technology. This has been an excellent committee to be part of, and I'm very proud that we have bipartisan recommendations that fundamentally set in place foundations for the future of policy in agriculture innovation for the 21st century and, I hope, for the 22nd century. We've particularly looked at innovation and productivity being the key to growth in Australian agriculture. And in Indi, productivity and growth are key to our ability to increase agricultural production, agricultural manufacturing, agricultural profitability, and in the long term, sustainability for the many people who live and work in our communities and our valleys. I'm very proud to be part of this committee and this inquiry in particular, as it brings together my interest, indeed my passion, for agriculture, research, extension, adoption, and the ability to increase the economic viability of our farming communities, and as a consequence, the economic viability and sustainability of our nation. And as a farmer, since 1980, I know how important research is, and I've always been an active learner and participator in many of the extension groups, and particularly how much I've enjoyed our Wurundjeri women and sheep group, learning about DSEs, introduction to soil tests and analysis, as well as being able to be part of a group learning activity in a community where we actually saw productivity increase in our community. I love extension. I love the impact it has to improve people's lives, to improve their farming ability and to bring a community together. And as a businesswoman, I've worked with most of the rural development corporations over 20 years, and I have had extensive insight into how our research gets funded, how it's translated to farmers, and I have enormous respect both for the scientists, the researchers, the extension officers and the people who work on those RDCs. And in my community work, I've worked as a volunteer with Australian Women in Agriculture, eventually rising to become the president of the organisation and to be awarded the great honour as a life member. So I've participated both in the organisational structure of the NGO and moving right through to being a representative on many government boards in that position. And as a woman in agriculture, as a farmer, I'm totally conscious of the importance of language and how our language defines our paradigms, and how I take enormous exception to when people refer to the farmer he. There's very, very few of our Australian farmers that are actually the or he. Most of our farms are run by family businesses and they contain men and women and young people. I am particularly conscious of how this language defines our research and development. And over the period of time, my research has shown that we have got a bias towards working with male farmers as opposed to the women farmers and the young people who are active partners of our farming business. So I've spent 20 years working with the Agricultural Research and Development Corporation, in particular to bring women into that mainstream of accessing the knowledge and the innovation so that they can be part of taking those innovations up on their farms. So just to put that little bit of attention there to the language, to the importance of talking about farming businesses and not just name individuals on the farm, to be inclusive of men and women and young people and older people when we try and take our innovations onto the farms. And the second large area where my voluntary work has given me great insight is being a regional councillor for the Victorian Farmers Federation over a number of years, and through that participating in the NFF and seeing how those national NGOs can have such an impact on our ability to deliver really sustainable growth on our farms. We're partners together. And the final bit of background that really adds to my love of being on this committee was being an active member of the the group of people that brought together the National Strategic Plan for Rural R&D in Australia, that looked at the grand picture of Australian rural research and development, and we came up with a national investment plan of what we needed to do to actually make the step-ups and take us through to the next stage of our development. So with that background, it fitted logically to me being on this committee and to being an active participant in the committee. And today I'm really pleased to talk about some of the 17 recommendations that were made. And in particular, I'd like to concentrate on 3 areas where we made recommendations. I'd like to talk about the recommendation regarding women. I'd like to talk about the recommendation about funding of CRCs and rural research and development corporations. And I'd like to finish by addressing my remarks about the mobile phone black spot program. So about women. There's a wonderful recommendation in this report that I'm really proud to acknowledge and work towards. Recommendation 6. The committee recommends that the Australian government ensure that rural women's groups are included in future government-led policy building activities and inquiries. In 1996, RIRDC, Rural Industries Research and Development Corporation, undertook a major project looking at the contribution Australian women in agriculture make to agriculture. The report, Missed Opportunities, had the figure of $14 billion, and that was 20 years ago, of women's contribution to agriculture. So it's vitally important that if we are going to do the innovations we need, make the step-ups that we need to really take Australian agriculture to the next level, we need to involve our women and we need to involve our young people. I rest my case there. It's obvious. It just needs to be done. The second recommendation I'd like to pay some attention to is recommendation 9. The committee recommends that the Department of Agriculture and Water Resources, in conjunction with the Department of Industry, Innovation and Science, investigate establishing appropriate incentives for the greater allocation of resources from rural research and development corporations to relevant cooperative research centres. So we had a major discussion in our committee about the role of RDCs and the role of CRCs, cooperative research centres, and how the CRCs can really take us into the next stage of our development. And there was one particular area that I'd like to bring to the attention of the Parliament. It was the need for working together for cooperation around our soils. Our soils underpin all of our agriculture. They're probably the most important resource we've got, but yet we've got no RDC that looks at soils as a whole. We've certainly got no CRC that looks at soil. And we heard that the problem is that soil is so all-encompassing, it's really hard to get everybody to work together. So my huge call to the people involved in rural research and development is, can we please pay attention to our soils? Can we bring wool and meat and dairy and horticulture and grains and sugar and the rest together and provide a cooperative looking at how we take our soils and our knowledge of soils to the future, not just for the carbon, not just for the micro life that exists there, but if we could grow our soils, we could really grow our agricultural productivity. So I put out a call there for a CRC on soils and really hope that in the next period of Parliament we can bring our work together on that and work together. And finally, I'd like to talk about recommendation 2 in the report. The committee recommends that the Australian government commit to the continuation of the mobile phone black spot program beyond the second round, and that the Department of Communication and the Arts consider changes and additions to the selection criteria to capture the telecommunications requirement of agricultural activity. And here I am scathing of the government. I am scathing of the budget that came down on Tuesday night. The Treasurer, Scott Morrison, gets up there and says he's got a plan for Australia. Well, he might have a plan for Sydney and Melbourne. He might have a plan for Brisbane and South Australia. He might have a plan for defence, but he certainly didn't bring down a plan for regional Australia. And the absolute effrontery of not having any money in that budget for the continuation of delivering mobile phone coverage to rural and regional Australia is something to be absolutely ashamed of. So, Scott Morrison, I call on you to do something about this. And to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, you were in charge of communications. You understand how important mobile phone coverage is. It's not an add-on. It's not an additional extra. We need mobile phone coverage in rural Australia, and we need it for agriculture. So I call on my government colleagues here. I call on all of you people who live in rural and regional Australia. Pay attention to what needs to be done. We need round 3, 4, 5 and 6 until wherever you are in rural and regional Australia you can use your mobile phone to do the business of this country that's so absolutely urgently needed.
I thank the member for Indi and I